This is Stephanie with today's video, trying to avoid a quilter's wonky miter, and then one little idea for the day. My issue with miters started with the wedding quilt that my sister-in-law and I are making for a friend. And she has hand stitched all of the little wheels and stitched those together. And when we got ready to do the border, a solid border just didn't look right. So we finally decided to go with the idea of 3 different colors. And when I went with the idea of 3 different colors, I had to decide, well, what did I want to do with the corners? And I went back to the idea of putting in a miter corner. And it's sort of like how you finish the binding. When you get to the end, you make a decision whether you're going to do it the easy way or you're going to do it the hard way. Well, I started with the only way I knew how to do it. And when I got done, I had some wonky corners. So I said, I'm going to rethink this, and somebody else might gain from my experience. This diagram shows what you do generally when you finish a quilt. You'll decide about the width of your border, and then you'll do the sides first, and then you'll do the top and the bottom. When you decide that you're going to do mitered corners, you have to add fabric to your border. That's the big thing. So it's a matter of finding out whether you have enough material to do that kind of a border when you extend it. And on each side, I've got a little dot right in the center. You want to know where the center point is in your border when you get it on, so you'll want to mark that. But in this example, I just took 2 numbers and said it was 25 inches one way and 50 the other. And I said, okay, my length was 50. Now, in this quilt that you're looking at, the border was going to be 5 inches. So I have to add 5 inches to each end of that 50-inch piece. So I really have 60 inches of border. And sometimes I add a little bit more just to make sure that it's not too skimpy. Then on the other side I had 25, but there again you had 5 inches worth of border on each end, so you would end up with 35 inches of border for that one side. All 4 sides are extended, and the plan is the same whether you're using a solid fabric or stripes for the border. Here's an example of a solid border which is very wide, and it went really well. I sewed it from the center point out to the black dot that I'd made that was 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and then I put the other piece on and did the same thing. Then I folded the 2 borders face to face, and I saw that I had got a corner right up here, a nice corner. I didn't have a lot of extra material on this one because I thought it'd be close, and so I laid them together and I drew a line. I got the 45-degree angle using one of my grids, and then laid them together. Now there was more material out here. I have trimmed that off already, but then I started back at the black dot and I traveled all the way out to the edge, and I opened it up and it looked good at that point, so I went ahead and did a little press job with it. And I knew I was going to be doing several of the miter corners, so then I took my Omni Grid and I put a piece of painter's tape down where the 45-inch degree angle is. And when I laid the grid on there, I found out that I was pretty much right on the mark, and I almost patted myself on the back. I said, I can't believe that the first try it comes out. Because if you look at the edges of the grid, you'll see that they line up with the edges of the border. Well, when I finished the wedding quilt corners, I laid them out and they just looked so good, and I said, oh man, I have done it the first try. But when I laid the grid up there to see if they'd be square, all of a sudden things were wonky, and I was losing a lot of material off of the outer edge of the black edge of that set of strips, and so I had to go back. One thing that I found helpful was in one of the videos, when they were sewing strips together, they would stitch one set of strips one way, and then when they got ready to add the other strip on, they'd add it and go stitch it back the other way. And I think that sort of helps keep your border from getting your strips from not getting kind of wonky when you get done and trying stretching them different directions. So yesterday I used the same method, and as I got ready to stitch, I watched that that these two colors were close together and that this was going to come and maybe intersect. So I turned it over, I drew the line that was 45 degrees, and I crossed my fingers. And I was really pleased. If you're a really, really careful, or it's just close enough, is I think is what I'm trying to get at. All right, then when I take my Omni Grid on there, it looked okay to a point, and I said, well, I better check it again, and if I wanted to draw a line for you to see, I wanted to set it over here and let you see where it was. And you can see that to square it up, I'm going to lose a little bit, but it's not enough to me to tear out and try and do it again, because inevitably, if I do that, I'm going to be more off than I was when I started. So this is the method of folding it and stitching the line and then looking to see how you've done. And it seems to have done better than the one I did, where I just lay the pieces out and I fold it and I try to get it at 45-degree angle and then stitch it together. And I'm going to go to the sewing machine now. Okay, what I want to do is show you a little bit about working on the miter. You can see this is the big extra piece that we added on the end, and this one happened to be 7 inches because this border is 7 inches wide. And on the bottom piece, which would be my quilt, I put a dot where I want to stop. And I've made that dot, and I actually held this up to the light, to the window, and made a dot right there so I'd know where I was going to stop. Now, this is the whole quilt, and this is the center of the quilt right here, and that's where you're going to start from the center and go out. So, and if it ends up giving you a little more material that way, it's all right. So I'm going to start over here in the center of my quilt, and I'm going to run to this dot. And then I do a little back stitch. That takes care of one side. And it comes to the corner. Now I'm going to push it out of the way. And I'm going to grab the other piece. Now I know where the center of my quilt is. And I know that I want this dot to end up on that dot, because this gave me that extra 7 inches out the side, because the border was 7 inches wide. So I'm going to line that dot up. Did the same thing. I held it up to the window to make sure that I had it where I wanted it. And then I'm going to stitch, but I'm going to stitch from the center. And that's sometimes why I add a little bit of extra to that 7 inches out there. Is that if I start here, then I know I have enough. You have to watch for that 45-degree angle. And I'll start in the center again. And I'm going to go to that dot. And I'm going to stop. Now we've got 2 sides ready to go. And you check and see, and you can see this one's off a little bit from missing the dot. And that could cause me a little bit of a problem because it's more than I want it to be. So I'm going to actually go back here And this is what you do. You'd go back and say, I need to add 3 or 4 more stitches on here so it's closer. This thing sort of fast. And back up. Hopefully that's closer. And usually if it's real pretty close, it will work just fine. And now I've got it ready to start. So I'm going to take these 2 pieces and I'm going to lay them face to face. And I'm going to pull that piece out so that it's all laying flat. Okay, and now it's where I'm going to start lining up my material. They're different lengths, and that's okay. And I've got that. All right, then I want to, for the minute, I want to grab my grid that's already got the 45 degrees on it. Let's see, how did I do that yesterday? I guess what I'll do here is I'll figure out where I want to start and where I want to go. And now I'm going to start at the dot. And I can eyeball that right down in there. But I want to get those, make sure those are as close as they can be. So, and the material slides, I'm going to pin it. And then we're going to cross our fingers and hope for the best. Trying to do this. If I had gotten a ruler with a 45 degree and an edge, that would have been better. Mostly I was just using it to check how I was doing. And then you don't want to use a Sharpie on your quilt. And
oh, great.
Did it stop?
It stopped for some reason. Well, it's still doing. It's still doing.
Okay, and I've got it lined up with the dot at the beginning, and that's where I'm going to start from. Don't start from the outer edge. And you can baste it. Just raise it in case you just want to check it. I'm still looking to make sure those are lined, seem to be lined up. I'm going to get ready to go. I've stitched it all the way to the end. All right, here's the moment. This may be right, it may not be right. Oh gosh. So when I open it up, I now have something I can live with. It makes me smile, and it's close enough. Whether it's just off 1/8 of an inch there, this is nice. And last thing that I want to do is I want to take and bring my Omni Grid up here and see how we're doing towards the edge. And if you look at it, I'm lined up, my edge is lined up, and I can live with that corner. Pause, please. And lastly, this is my idea for the day. And this has been fun. Sometimes fun with quilting is my favorite word. But, you know, I keep all my samples in my sketchbooks. I've said that many times. Well, the squares that I've done, I put those in notebooks so I can go back and look at those. But then after doing that quilt as you go and thinking about how narrow the strips are and how to see a nice strip at a time, I said, well, I'm going to take and make myself a sashing sampler. And so I started with the first section, and it's all different colors of the pastels and other colors that go together, but they're just solids and white strips. And I actually filled up one strip, and then, so this time now I've added another one on the end, and I've actually got another one ready to go when I get this one filled up. And it really gives me a lot of space for practice, and it really lets me see some of the things that I could do for sashing. I hope you've gotten something out of today. If you have any ideas of something you want me to try and do and show you, let me know, and have a great day.